I'm sure we'll do fine.
Okay.
What's that? It's just saying. Okay.
All right, we should be broadcasting now. Let me double check.
Okay.
And it looks like we are broadcasting. So we are good to go. We can start.
Good. Well, is it 6? Let's see what time it is here. I have 6 o'clock.
Yep.
Good evening to most of us who are here in Arizona, and I suppose that's evening to everybody else. If there are people coming from other parts of the country or even the globe. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. My name is Neil Lester. I'm a professor here at Arizona State University, and I direct an initiative called Project Humanities. Project Humanities is not a department, and it's not a research center, but rather an opportunity to bring people together across disciplines, across generations, and across professions. Tonight's program is an opportunity to explore a topic that we started exactly last fall on parenting. It was a special gift from the Come Rain or Shine Foundation. And that particular foundation has decided that its emphasis and resources will be dedicated to the notion of parenting. And they ask us to come and help determine directions for that foundation. And I'm pleased to say that tonight will constitute our 6th installment in our parenting series. The first program that we had last fall was on something called conscious parenting, which essentially is looking at the ways in which people parent through the lens of our humanity. So if Rachel, if you could bring that slide up, the Humanity 101 and the Come Rain or Shine Foundation slide. The second program was on parenting across cultures, thank you. And the third was on parenting and suicide. The fourth was on talking to children about the bad, ugly, and the inevitable. And then 2 weeks ago, we had our first virtual, because of the virus and our change of format, on toxic parenting behavior. So we're very excited tonight to talk about aging parents. All of these have been held together by something that Project Humanities calls Humanity 101. And it responds to the question of, are we losing our humanity? And if we think about what's happening in the world, we see the good, the bad, and the inevitable. But through all of this, we're hoping that people will ask this question of, are we losing our humanity? And answer that with an affirmation that we are not losing our humanity, that we are in fact practicing these 7 principles: compassion, empathy, forgiveness, integrity, kindness, respect, and self-reflection. This is not faith-based, and this is not a class, but rather a virtual and a real toolbox for individuals to use to become, not just in this case, better parents, but better adults and ultimately better humans. So tonight we have quite a lineup, and we'll be asking you before you leave our Zoom room tonight to take the Humanity 101 pledge, but that's only if you can commit to espousing and promoting and trying to the best of your ability to live these 7 principles. All right. Thank you all for coming. The event tonight is being recorded for our documentation reasons. We will also have a chat feature so that we will have engagement, and we do want this to be, as much as possible, a conversation. Thank you all for coming again. We don't take it for granted that you could be someplace else doing something else, but the fact that you're here with us tonight is most appreciated. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jocelyn Booker-Ole, and I'm a coordinator with Project Humanities. Thank you so much again for being here with us. We wanted to talk a little bit about the why behind this program. So often when we talk about parenting, we think of little ones, first and foremost, babies and toddlers and little kids. But obviously we know that parenting continues on, and parenting encompasses lots of different components to kind of one of the things we've been talking about a little bit is that many of our parents are aging, as parents do, as we all do. And this is a national, if not international, conversation that's been happening the last few years as baby boomers, or those who were born between 1946 and 1964 were born. Roughly 76 million Americans right now are considered baby boomers. And they're now in their 60s and 70s. And they do have, you know, some specific issues as an age group, as a generation. So many folks are retiring. Some are unable to retire due to financial instability. There is an increase in need for healthcare. For some folks, as they age, they are a large voting bloc, which can be really important when it comes to campaigns and national and local elections. Life expectancy is longer than ever before, than previous generations. And so, you know, our ideas about aging a little bit. Historically speaking, aging maybe meant something different prior to now, because life expectancy is so long. Obviously, medical technology has evolved significantly, whether it's different kinds of tests or preventative medicine, or the types of technology that we have now that can keep folks around longer. Most Americans can expect to live into their 70s, if not longer. We don't think of 60 as old anymore, right? And folks are staying more active for years beyond what maybe used to be the case. Not the idea of, you know, a great grandmother just hanging out in the living room, taking care of grandkids, great grandkids, has shifted a little bit. Our cultural beliefs on aging changed. The way that we value older folks has shifted a little bit. In the past, families could maybe expect to care for an elderly loved one in their home, but it was much less common for one person to live into their 80s, 90s, and beyond. So now caring for an elderly loved one may be something you do for 10, 20, 30 years. And on the screen right now, you can see nearly 50 million Americans live in at least a 2-generation household. So one thing that tends to happen is that we have families caring for younger ones and caring for older ones in the same home. Sometimes older folks are caring for the little ones while the parents are at work. It's just all kinds of different ways to make the multi-generational home work. And then of course, right now, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention some issues that are occurring right this minute with COVID. And so with that, I want to introduce our first panelist, Melissa Elliott. And she works for the Area Agency on Aging, and we'll do a proper introduction in just a second. But Melissa, was there anything you wanted to mention about how folks right now are dealing with COVID?
So I think obviously with the changes to our daily lives, we've seen a lot of impact to our older adult population. We know it's not news to anybody that this is a group that's particularly high risk for contracting the disease, and so there's been extra protections that have been put in place. It's really great to see how the community and government organizations have stepped up to really try and protect our seniors, many of whom previously could go grocery shopping and get the things that they needed, but now due to the restrictions can't. So our agency has really been focusing most on making sure that our older adults have access to food. We've had a great uptick in our calls to our 24-hour senior helpline, most of which have focused on getting food and supplies and the impact that that has caused for older adults and for caregivers. So it's great to see that many of the grocery stores have done special senior hours and things like that to really accommodate during this time. But our main focus right now, and it seems like the main focus of most people, is just making sure they have access to their basic daily needs, which of course includes proper food.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm sure that'll come up a little bit in and out of our program tonight. Dr. Lester, do you want to go ahead and introduce our panelists?
Yes, thank you very much, Jocelyn. We have always been very excited and very mindful about bringing those who are experts in the field to offer perspective. So this is not just an armchair conversation about a topic that either is a lived experience for us or something that's just an intellectual exercise. Our experts tonight, and I'll introduce them. I know that one of our attendees is asked about a panelist. The first I'll introduce is Dr. Kristin Samuelson. Dr. Samuelson is a clinical assistant professor of audiology in the ASU College of Health Solutions and also the director of ASU's audiology clinic. Dr. Samuelson has been a clinical audiologist for about 30 years, working primarily with adult and geriatric patients in both the private and public sector. Her specialty area of interest is fitting of hearing instruments and hearing assistive technologies. Thank you very much, Dr. Samuelson, for taking time to be with us tonight. We look forward to hearing your expertise and perspective. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Johanna Uriri Glover, who is a clinical professor and program coordinator of the ASU Edson College of Nursing and Health Innovation. Her doctoral degree is in nursing research, and she specializes in gerontological nursing research and research methodologies. Her expertise specifically has to do with nursing care of older adults, and clinical research and research interest also intersect with interventions that assist family caregivers with providing care to those with dementia. Thank you very much, Dr. Glover. Professor Melissa Elliott has worked with older adults for 20 years in both recreation programming and social services. She has worked in skilled nursing facilities and the home health sector and has been at the Area Agency on Aging, Region 1 in Phoenix for 13 years and currently serves as the Vice President of Programs and Services, where she oversees several of the agency's major programs and services. She's also an adjunct professor here at ASU in the School of Social Work. Thank you, Professor Elliott. And last but not least, we have Dr. Marisa Menchola. She is a board certified clinical neuropsychologist in Tucson, and she currently serves on the board of directors of the Desert Southwest chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, as chair of the Regional Leadership Council for Alzheimer's Association's Southern Arizona office, as professional practice representative, and in the Leadership Development Committee for Arizona Psychology Association, and is on the board of directors. Her advocacy interests include issues relating to aging and the role of psychologists in reducing health disparities affecting historically underserved populations. So please join me in giving them a warm welcome and an appreciation for spending time with us tonight. Thank you all for being here. Rachel?
Let me get that started for you. So now we're transitioning to an activity that's kind of set to gauge everybody's current familiarity with the topic and just gauging where we're all at. So right now I'm actually going to launch a poll. And you should see that. For those who are joining on Zoom, you should be able to see that on your screen. And I'm gonna we'll just give about 3 minutes to do the poll really quick. It's 6 questions, it's true or false, it's pretty straightforward. Is everyone seeing it? All right, can anybody not see it? Okay, so we are getting votes now, so I think people are able to see it. Woo! All right, we'll give 2 more minutes for everyone to do that. Looks like we've got about 5% of our folks who are on the call who have done it so far.
Okay, Rachel?
Hi. I don't know what's going on right now in terms of the chat. So I am going to just close the poll and continue with the presentation. And I'm going to shut down the chat if this continues happening. Okay. Okay, I am going to shut down the chat. But for now, we'll just, I'll close the poll. Okay. And I will share the results so you all can see that, and I will shut down the chat.
I think, Rachel, we should probably share. We have people on Facebook Live that may be watching and they can't see what's happening, maybe.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Right now we're having some technical difficulties with hackers in our chat. So I am going to try to fix that. And while we are trying to fix that,
while Rachel is trying to fix that, I'm wondering if we can look at the results that just came up on the poll, and if some of our experts may want to address those. Are you able to address that, to look at, is that true? Number one, almost 20% of adults 65 or older are unemployed. Do we have an answer for that? Most people think that's true. Rachel, are you the only person with the answer to that question? Okay. So is that true or false?
So then that is true.
Yeah, so it looks like that is true.
Okay.
So the employment population ratio of persons 65 and over has been from approximately 12% in the mid-90s to over 18%, roughly 2015, 2016. So there's probably lots of different reasons for that. One, some folks want to work longer. They feel good. They feel like they have more to contribute. And another option may be that folks still need the money. So they continue to work for financial reasons.
Okay. All right. Number two, most adults.
On to the next one.
Yes, most adults over the age of 65 need help with their personal care. Is that true or false? It looks like 65% of us say that's false. And the answer is, in fact,
Rachel,
false.
can you switch?
Yep. Yep. All right. As you can see from the slide.
Thank you.
Yes.
So from ages 65 to 74, most people don't need a lot of help with their personal care. As we were discussing earlier, aging looks different now. And 65 to 74 is not old. 75
yep.
help personal care. Things do shift a little bit once we 85 age and up.
Okay. 3.
All right. Most older adults live in group quarters, nursing homes, assisted living, etc. True or false?
And oh my gosh, we've got a pretty smart group here tonight. So the answer is false. 2% of adults aged 50 to 64 and 65 through 79 live in group quarters. That's a really small percentage than what it may look like if you're driving down neighborhoods and seeing senior living facilities. 8% of adults 80 or over live in quarters. Okay. And
correct. And that's not to say necessarily that folks are living completely independently. They may live with family members, or they may have in-home care as well.
Right. All right. And 4.
All right. Next one, most adults who are 65 and over and living outside of group quarters are in good health.
Okay. That's actually wow, people were split on that. All right, well, here's the truth according to the data. 78.3% of people living privately and age 65 or over are reported to be in good health. And we'd have to explore that a little deeply.
That's great. So that could mean lots of different.
Can I address that, Johanna?
Yeah, just like with any other, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Normally when you question older adults, even if they really are frail or have experiencing, you know, chronic illnesses and really have to, those illnesses have to be managed, a lot of them will report their health as good.
Well, and that necessarily wouldn't be different from some of us who are not necessarily in that group, because we describe ourselves in good health, even though we may have other issues going on that wouldn't constitute good health.
Correct.
Okay.
I was thinking maybe folks with something chronic but manageable, like diabetes or COPD or something like that.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to the last one.
That's true.
One in seven middle-aged adults, is that the one? Yep, is providing financial support. Nope. Are we looking at 5 or 6? I'm sorry. I'm trying to multitask. You said the last one.
I know, sorry.
There
we go. 1 out of 8. Go ahead. 1 out of every 8. Oh, okay. Go ahead and leave it there. About 1 in 7 middle-aged adults is providing financial support to both an aging parent and a child. So this is something that we sometimes call sandwich parenting, the sandwich generation. Is that true or false?
Okay.
Sorry.
So the answer to that is actually true.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, so 47% of adults in their 40s and 50s have a parent age 65 or older and are either raising a young child or financially supporting a grown child. 15% report supporting both a child and an aging parent. So it probably should come as no surprise because of a number of things. One is folks maybe having children later in life, so by the time they have their own kids, their own parents are a little older. Also, we know that lots of folks in their early 20s to late 20s are needing more financial support for lots of different reasons. Housing costs are high. There's tuition, student loans to pay off, more gig work as opposed to stable jobs with benefits, all that kind of good stuff. So there's lots of reasons for that. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Rachel, if we could get to, there we go. Great, thank you. Okay, so we'd love to chat a little bit about some of these issues. The first thing we're going to talk about is, what does it mean to care for an aging parent? And our first question goes to Dr. Glover, and then Dr. Menchola. Is there, quote, an American way of working with or caring for the elderly, and how does this differ from other cultures? Dr. Glover?
Okay. There is a stereotype that Americans abandon their parents when they become unable to take care of themselves. But in reality, only 3 to 5% of older adults reside in nursing homes and over a long-term time period. Approximately 43.5 million family caregivers provide about $405 billion of unpaid caregiving services for family members, most often to a parent or a grandparent. Most spend 18 hours a week providing care, and 1/3 of family caregivers spend 63 hours a week in caregiving activities. caregivers are mainly children. Usually it's a daughter or a daughter-in-law, and they're the only caregiver. Sometimes the spouses share in the caregiving activities. The male handles the business aspects of caregiving, such as instrumental activities of daily living, which is shopping, handling finances, laundry, housekeeping, and transportation. And the female provides the activities of daily living, which consist of feeding, bathing, grooming, dressing, and toileting. The actual physical hands-on caregiving activities. Older caregivers are spouses who are often in their 70s and 80s and with one or more chronic illnesses. Research suggests that they are happy caring for their spouse. Men are more strategic in their caregiving. They map out a plan and they tend to follow the rules. Women tend to implement caregiving the way they cared for their families in the past. And again, in America, we're very diverse with many different nationalities who bring their aging parents to this country. Immigrants take care of their families according to the cultural beliefs or traditions. Researchers stress that this may change due to younger generations assimilating into American culture. If you look at how we differ from other cultures, if you look at Europe, we're always lumped together with Europe because most of the older adults, they live independently on their own until they are unable to care for themselves. For instance, Scotland recognizes older adults as valued members of society and they have a voice in society. Like us, they incorporate aging in place where homes are modified so older adults can remain in there. And now in America, the designers are looking at generational housing where the older adult family member can have a space of their own, but they live in the same house. Japan is known as the kindest of the countries because the appreciation for older adults is ingrained in families and their children. Both Vietnam and the Philippines, being old is considered an asset, not a liability. Older adults live with their families for support and care, and in return, they prepare meals and care for their grandchildren. In Vietnam specifically, older adults are considered the head of the family, and their advice is of value so much that they are the decision makers in the household. Now, China, respecting older adults in China is a law, and older adults can sue their children for emotional and financial support. The aged are increasing in China, and so it's very important that family members take care of their older adult family members in order not to jeopardize the Chinese economy. I was working on a project for this summer to teach in China and at a university and teach them about aging. But I was told that the majority of the older adults reside in nursing homes because the laws limiting the number of children, a couple could have. So it's not that many, they're not large families to take care of their older adult population. Also in Ghana and Africa, other countries in Africa, older adults are cared by their family. But again, things are changing. They don't have enough family caregivers because the number of family members are shrinking and the people are busy. So they're trying to find innovative ways to take care of their older adult population in that country.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Glover. Dr. Menchola, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. So in principle, yes, there's an American way of caring for the elderly, but as Dr. Glover mentioned, there's also a lot of variability within the US. So people from different ethnicities, different cultures, different socioeconomic statuses show very significant differences in how they approach aging and caring for older adults. But a couple of important ways in which the US differs from other countries and other cultures. So I'd like to highlight two things: the issues of independence and then the issue of integration. So the US, as we know, is a country that values independence and self-reliance very highly. So for example, in surveys about concerns about aging, the loss of independence tends to be one of the most commonly mentioned concerns that Americans have in terms of aging. And so because of that, when we care for older adults, we tend to emphasize those things that are going to allow older adults to remain independent and self-reliant longer. So things like in-home care, things like transportation, for example. In cultures where independence is not as highly valued, where interdependence and reliance on others are more important values, this sort of loss of independence that can happen with aging, it's still difficult, but it's not as dramatic as a loss as it is in the US, because older adults expect that their families are going to step in to meet their needs, and families anticipate that they're going to be doing this for their aging parents. And the second issue is the issue of integration, which refers to this fact that in the US, we tend to see older adults as sort of a separate group, separate from mainstream society, which is very often defined in terms of productivity, right? So there's this push, for example, in the US for older adults to work later than they do in other developed countries, for example. And even after they retire, there's sort of this expectation to be a productive member of society, for example, by volunteering, right? And remaining engaged in their communities. Where in other countries, there's less of an emphasis on productivity, and older adults are seen as more integrated, not just to society, but to their families' lives. So perhaps they're not contributing the sense of productivity to society, but they're very important, as Dr. Glover mentioned, for example, in the sense of raising the younger generations. And they hold a lot of family authority, where the family will very often actually defer to the grandparents, for example, for important family decisions. But again, there's going to be a lot of variability within the United States, probably as much as across cultures, across countries.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Menchola. And I thank you for bringing that up. Just wanted to chime in real quick that we also have to be acknowledging the fact that there are financial barriers that some folks will experience in our culture, in American culture, and because we are a multicultural society, people handle things differently. I know I can speak from personal experience that my grandparents, you know, even 10 years ago when they needed in-home care, we were talking about several $1,000s a month in order to get that in-home care, and that's just not feasible for many, many folks. So there are some differences when it comes to class and status, financial status as well. Dr. Glover, what are some of the common challenges families with older parents face? You're muted again. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So one of the challenges for caregivers is managing their time. Caregivers often find that they have less time for themselves and other family members. And they actually, some of them are working, so they have trouble balancing their work schedule and around caregiving. Then some of them experience emotional and physical stress. Research studies report that 75% of family caregivers report caregiver burden. 20% of caregivers report that their health has gotten worse as a result of caregiving. And we actually see this in practice, especially I worked with a lot of Alzheimer's disease patients, and the caregiver sometimes, the person with dementia sometimes outlived the caregiver. So we need to really look at our caregivers and make sure that they are taking care of themselves also. Another challenge is lack of privacy. A family caregiver often reports feeling a lack of privacy in their home and finding alone time during due to caregiving responsibilities. The other issue is financial strain. Because most family caregivers are unpaid, they can start to feel some financial strain, especially when caregivers take them away from their paying job. And also, they may have to pay into the care that they're providing to the patient, to their family member. For example, they might have to pay co-pays and those kind of things. It's some help for people who are working. Employees are covered under the federal and the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, and they may be able to take 12 weeks off, but it's unpaid. Wow. Another one is sleep deprivation. Lack of sleep is a big issue for family caregivers, as often the loved one's sleep-wake cycle is mixed up. We did a study with family caregivers living in the community with people with dementia, and we gave the person a lavender oil towel bath. And what we found is the person with dementia slept and the family caregiver slept. Because people with dementia, some of them will wake up in the middle of the night, and they may even wander out into the night, into the streets and things like that. So the family caregiver can't sleep. Being afraid to ask for help. Many caregivers feel they must assume the full caregiver burden, and as asking someone for assistance may be a sign of weakness. One of the things that family caregivers experience, depression and isolation. Family caregivers often at high risk for depression. Oftentimes caregiving duties take up so much of their time that they no longer maintain social connections outside of the home. A lot of caregivers want to be informed. They need general information, what support services are available, and sometimes have a difficulty assessing culturally appropriate information and services, transportation and emergency and overnight respite, and financial assistance. A big issue is advanced care planning discussions with their family member. We like to have those discussions occur early, where the older adult is able to tell someone what they actually desire instead of waiting too late for that. One of the things is when you see family caregivers, they really want to, when they first start providing the care, they're really energetic. They want to care for these people, their family member. They want to do a good job, and then they forget themselves. And one of my thoughts is with respite, instead of waiting until they burn out, maybe let's start it early. And they might have like a date night, like people, young people have, or married couples have, like one night a week that they can, go out and, just have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Glover. Dr. Menchola, can you maybe speak to what some additional challenges folks face if they have a parent or elderly loved one with memory loss or other cognitive issues?
Yes, of course. So just to sort of clarify the terms that we're using so we're all on the same page, when we talk about cognitive impairment, we're talking about impairment in sort of mental functions, things like memory, concentration, language, perhaps reasoning, problem solving, things like that. And so about 15% of people age 70, 30% of people 70 or older experience some degree of mild cognitive impairment that does not interfere with the person's ability to live independently. The person can still drive themselves, they can handle their medications, their doctor's appointments, they can make their payments. Dementia refers to cognitive impairment that is so severe that it actually interferes with the person's ability to live their lives independently. They're missing their payments, they're leaving the stove on, they get lost when they're driving, they forget to take their medications. And about 15% of people 70 and older have some form of dementia. Alzheimer's disease dementia is the most common type of dementia. Once you get to ages 85 and older, a third of older adults ages 85 and older have Alzheimer's dementia. And by the way, something that's particularly important for our discussion is that Arizona has the highest rate of growth in terms of people living with Alzheimer's disease. In the next 5 years, we expect a 33% increase in the number of people living with Alzheimer's in Arizona. Is the largest increase in the whole country. So this is a very common problem that touches all of us at some point. So some additional challenges for these families. The main one is the issue of safety. When you're caring for an older parent that has some kind of cognitive impairment, they don't just need support and assistance, but they might reach the point where they actually need supervision to make sure that they are doing what they need to do. You know, they're taking their medications, they're locking the house, they're turning the stove off, weapons are securely stored, and so on. And so this is one of the safety concerns, obviously significantly increase the stress of the family caregivers. And one of the most significant sources of stress is sort of how do you balance the need to make sure that your parent is safe with your desire to respect their independence and autonomy, and deciding when it's time to jump in and perhaps take over, for example, for decision making is a very difficult decision to make. A second very important issue is all the barriers that families face to get early diagnoses when a parent is displaying cognitive impairment. It is extremely important to get our older parents in to be evaluated and start treatment for cognitive impairment early on, because we need to know what is causing the impairment. Is it Alzheimer's? Are they having strokes? Is it depression? Because the treatment is going to be very different, and the course, whether it's going to get worse and how fast, is also going to be very different depending on what's causing the issue. And then the last thing I would mention is really an emotional challenge, which is this thing we call anticipatory grief, which is the fact that when one of our loved ones develops, say, dementia that is progressive, meaning they're going to get worse, we're caring for this person that we've loved and known our whole lives, and yet it's almost as if we're losing the person while they're still alive. And that adds a layer of emotional challenge for the caregiver that can be very, very draining and very difficult to manage. So it's almost like you're caring for this person that's in front of you, yet grieving losing that person that you're caring for. So it's particularly stressful, and it can add a lot of financial and health challenges for the caregiver.
We heard that called ambiguous loss. Is that, and it's certainly a painful way to watch that, having experienced it.
That's right. It's a related term of this thing where you've lost the person in some ways, but not others, right? People use ambiguous loss also to refer to, for example, when a loved one goes missing, right? You don't know if they're alive, if they're dead, but you've lost them. Yeah, right. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Menchola. And I'm going to hand over to Shayna Tobkin.
Hi all, I'm Shayna. I'm another coordinator here at Project Humanities. We want to move into part 2 of our little panel Q&A here. And this section addresses the question, how can elder care continue to bestow upon elders dignity, respect, and compassion? And the first question I want to ask goes out to Melissa. We want to know, over time or over generations, how have our beliefs about older folks changed?
Okay, I just lost my video. I'm sorry, so I'll start talking while I try to get my video back. But I think the most important thing is that I think more people are in contact with older adults. So what I always tell my students is when students kind of start to choose their specialty in social work, Many of them are not interested in older adults. And one thing that I tell them is that regardless of what setting you work in, you will come in contact with older adults. So whether you work in a hospital or you work in a school or wherever you work, you're going to interact with older adults who are raising grandchildren, older adults who are coming for medical care. Many of us now work with a larger percentage of older adults than we used to. I know at my agency, we have several individuals who are still working and they're 60 and older. We have several individuals who are 70 and older, and a couple of individuals at my office who are 80 and older. So I think our beliefs have changed because more people are interacting with older adults in the community at large. It used to be that, you know, you maybe knew your grandparents, maybe if they were still alive when you were born, but now you know a wider number of older adults. And it's important that we understand about what they're experiencing at that stage of life. So Jocelyn hit on some of these in her introduction, but obviously we have a huge cohort of older adults. So our lifespan is longer. An older adult can be, for the purposes of the work that I do, we usually refer to older adults as anybody 60 and older. So you can imagine that if you have somebody that lives to be 90 or even 100, which people are doing quite often now, you have almost a 40-year age cohort. And think about the diversity of beliefs and choices and preferences that occur in that age group of people. And I think that that's really important to remember. I think the next point that I'll be talking about is related to ageism. And I think that that's one of the best ways that we combat ageism is we just recognize that individuals want to be treated as individuals no matter what their age is. So as a 65-year-old, I don't want to be treated in the same way as a 90-year-old. And I think we see that now. We used to think of all older adults as these poor older people in wheelchairs who are in nursing homes. When in fact, we know from our poll that the majority of our older adults are not living in nursing homes. They're living in the community, they want to stay in the community, and they're relatively healthy. That does go, it's important to know that even though they're relatively healthy, about a large percentage of our older adults are living with at least one chronic illness. So we see lifestyle illnesses due to lifestyle that are more prevalent than they used to be. People used to die of disease, but now we see people that are managing chronic conditions for a really long time. Things like diabetes or COPD or congestive heart failure, and they may be able to perfectly manage that, but they're still living with that every day. So our older adults today also have access to a lot of prescription medications. And that has caused problems which are prevalent, not just in older adults, but across our population with our opioid epidemic. But we also need to remember that a lot of these medications are helpful in managing pain and managing other diseases and conditions. So we need to make sure that, you know, we're giving older adults choices when it comes to their health care and the prescriptions and things that they use to treat disease or to help them, quote unquote, age successfully. A couple of things that I've seen in my work, which I absolutely love, is that there is a great spirit of volunteerism now in our older population. So many are continuing to work a lot longer, or they might work part-time, but in their off hours, they want to be volunteering. They're contacting community agencies. They want to be engaged in their community. They want to work alongside younger generations or their family members. And I think that more than I've ever seen it before, we have this huge number of older adults who want to volunteer and give back to their community. So I think in terms of, you know, programming, we need to look at that as how can we really engage older adults in meaningful ways in their community, because they're healthier, they're able to work and learn and serve longer in their community. And so I think that that's a great plus of the older adults that we have alive today. I think also the last thing that I would say is just that we need to be aware of all aspects of older adults' lives. I think typically we focus on physical health the most as we age, and There's a great need to focus on mental health. There's a great need to focus on sexual health. There's a great need to focus on, you know, safety in relationships and dating. Some of the issues that plague younger generations also plague the older adult generation, and that is elder abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault. And we need to not be afraid to talk about those things in an older adult population, because they're facing the same issues, and we can't be afraid to shy away and think that those are not problems that face our older adults as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm wondering, for some folks who may not know what ageism is, Melissa, can you talk more about what that is and how it might affect our relationships with older folks?
Sure. So ageism is really discrimination based on somebody's numerical age. So this can occur for somebody at any age. You know, I'm 43, so somebody might discriminate against me because I'm 43. But when we talk about age discrimination, we talk about kind of a prevalent mindset that someone above a certain age shouldn't do certain things, or isn't entitled to certain things, or, you know, shouldn't even be a focus of our community or funding or programming. And one story that I like to tell is we used to do this program. It was a multi-generational program, and we used to ask young kids at what age they thought that people should stop driving. And when they first came into the program, they used to say things like 45 years old, 50 years old. And then after they participated in an 8-week program with our older adults, they always significantly increased the age. And they recognized that, you know, this older adult wasn't as scary as they thought they were. If they were driving on the road next to them, it wouldn't be scary. So I think attitudes like that, unfortunately, are still somewhat pervasive in our community. And we need to understand what ageism is and how it permeates across different aspects of our community.
Can I add something? Can I add something there too? You know, even if we start looking at, as we were preparing our PowerPoint for this presentation, we had an image that had actually come from an organization that gave us some of the data points, but some of the images that were there were problematic. In fact, when they talked about aging, it had a person with a cane to suggest that every person who is old has a cane. The other thing that's often left out of these conversations when we talk about aging and parenting is the fact that we, by default, often talk about these parents in terms of heteronormativity. When we were looking at senior living spaces for my in-laws, that was one thing that I noticed. Not only were they overwhelmingly white, but they were also overwhelmingly heterosexual. And so when I started to figure out, well, where are the LGBTQ spaces for aging adults, is as though those folks just disappear if they were visible at all when they were younger. So that's something that's part of the sort of ageism also, is in representation. And I'll say one thing, a local high school had senior day last year, and guess what the seniors dressed as? Seniors. And they all had gray wigs on and walkers and everything that would be funny that we would see on a Saturday Night Live skit became part of how ageism is a cultural thing that's perpetuated in these seemingly innocent ways. Thank you.
Dr. Menchola, did you want to talk on ageism a little bit?
Sure, just a few things in terms of how to sort of fight back, right, against it. And but first, one thing that I wanted to add is that, you know, this is more than just a concern about, I mean, there's very real consequences to ageism, like Melissa was pointed out, you know, discrimination, but it also affects people's health, mental and physical health. So studies have shown that people who actually, they themselves have internalized these ageist messages that we're exposed to constantly, right? So people that have very negative stereotypes about aging, decades later, when they are aging, they have worse health, they have worse cardiovascular health. Some of them have worse, you know, if you think when you're young that aging is related to like all these memory problems and cognitive decline, those people decades later as they age, they have worse memory, and actually even brain changes have been documented, like larger, you know, decreases in the volume of brain structures related to memory. So ageism is a very real, very important problem that has a lot of very different consequences. And in terms of how we work on this, the very first thing is always with any kind of bias is going to be awareness, right? We cannot change what we don't see. And so we need to start by looking at our own ageist beliefs. So, you know, do we avoid standing behind the older lady at the checkout counter in the grocery store because we assume she's going to take forever? Do we get out from behind an older driver on the road because we assume he's going to be an unsafe driver? If given a chance, do we always choose to see the younger doctor in the clinic, right? And why do we do that? What assumptions are we making? And so this can make us uncomfortable, but it is very important for us to start noticing. And then, like with any habit, we have to practice. If you're watching TV, you need to notice, you know, make a point of noticing, like, there's no older characters, or the older character is sort of the butt of the joke, right? Or it's kind of you know, this kind of frail or inappropriate or incompetent character. And why is that character represented through an older actor, and so on? You know, let's make a point of noticing the ads. Are there older people in ads, and all these anti-aging everything, right? And what message is that? And let's talk about that within the family and with our kids and so on. One other thing that we need to be aware of is that not all ageism comes in the sort of mean-spirited package. Sometimes very well-intentioned attitudes and comments can be ageist, right? Every time we jump in and do something for an older adult because we just assume they can't do it. Or every time you go ahead and make a decision for your mom, like, oh, let's not worry her about it, I'll just take care of it, without asking what she would prefer. Or, you know, I so often have students just refer to patients, oh, she's such a sweet old lady. You know nothing about her. Why would you assume that? Or every time we refer to, you know, we see an older couple holding hands and we say, oh, it's so adorable, it's so cute, which can be sort of infantilizing or condescending. So, and because these things can be confusing and we sometimes don't know, am I being ageist? Is this an ageist belief? We need to talk about it. And like with any kind of bias, let's talk to the people it affects. Ask your older adult, your older relatives, did that bother you? Did that joke bother you? Did it bother you how the doctor talks to you? Let's bring it out in the open and talk about it. And exposure. We need to expose, you know, our younger relatives. They need to spend time with older adults within the family, outside of the family, volunteer in a community center with older adults. If we don't get to know well a population, it's much easier to stereotype them and make assumptions about them.
Can I ask a question of our panelists? When it comes, so I think this conversation on ageism is extremely interesting, but I'd like to know our panelists' thoughts about how people perceive their own aging. So, for example, I've moderated a lot of focus groups with people age 55 and older related to housing and advertising to them for housing. And when I show them pictures of people and I say, do you relate to these, you know, this image or that image, which one looks like you, which one looks like a place you'd want to belong to? Inevitably, they would point to photographs of people about 10 to 15 years younger than them as being, that's me. So part of our own humanity is that, you know, we like to see ourselves maybe better than we are, you know, or younger than we are. So some of this is sort of, I guess my question to you is, how do you deal with that when we as individuals, regardless of our age, I think I'm look 10 years younger than I really do. And that carries on. And I've found that the older we get, you know, it's like now it's like 15 years younger. Have you seen that also? Is that ageism, or is this just sort of a, you know, our human vanity? How do you deal with that in this concept of ageism?
I want to just add a comment because it goes back to our culture, because we are a youth-oriented culture in America. And when you look at the other countries, they value ageism. And sometimes it's kind of like you kind of ingrain that in yourself just the same views because that's the way you lived, you know, all your life. We see older adults in the past. I think it's changing where after a certain age, you have to have your hair cut, you know. And so, and they used to wear muumuus. And now you see them wearing exercise. So I see the change. But yes, but I think it's ingrained into us in society of how we view ourselves. And we don't want to be that old lady or old man, you know, when we're interacting, you know. And I have students that say, well, that happened in years ago in the hospital, but it hasn't changed, you know. And that they don't value the wisdom that's, you know, that the person has or the life experience that they have, whereas in other cultures, it's valued.
I would add to that, I think sometimes, you know, the language that we use and the way we approach things kind of helps to quote unquote normalize that we all kind of need the same things. So we've had experiences, we have this booklet that our agency produces. It's called the Elder Resource Guide. And this year we changed the name to the Area Agency Resource Guide. And we did that intentionally because people would come up to us in the community and they would say, oh, I don't really need this, but I'm taking it for a friend. Or I'm not aging yet, I'm taking this for a friend. But if you can kind of normalize and say, you don't need these resources because you're aging, you need these resources because everybody needs resources that will help them in their life. Or, you know, we want you to take this class because taking care of your health is important. It's not because, you know, you're an old person and you can't take care of yourself anymore. So I think that it's really important that we try to use language and Michelle, you were referencing marketing. We find that same experience. We try to use pictures that people will relate to. People don't want to see themselves as the old lady with the cane. They want to see themselves as an active person that can still be involved in their community. So I think we have to do this very intentionally. And the two areas that I'm always concerned about are mental health. I mean, I think we need to talk to people and make sure they know that depression is not a normal part of aging, and that we as a community, we should not accept that, and we shouldn't accept that from anybody who believes that I'm old and therefore I need to be depressed. And I think we see that in other areas. We make assumptions that older adults can't use technology, and when in fact they can, and it's very useful. And so I think just being intentional about how we present things, go about things, and the type of language that we use can help those who are maybe feeling a little bit self-conscious about the natural aging process. It can help normalize it a little bit and help them feel more comfortable if there is something that needs to be addressed or that they need to participate in.
And one more thing that I would add to Michelle's question is this issue of exposure. I mean, to some degree, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot because we tend to, you know, think about when young kids, for example, are exposed to older adults. We're often doing like, oh, let's go to the nursing home or the rehab unit to cheer up these older adults that are sick or they're frail, as opposed to, you know, how many of us were exposed in school to like older athletes that are out there doing amazing athletic feats, or older artists? So, you know, so again, I think the issue of exposure, we project and we imagine based on what we know, right? So if all I have been exposed to are these like commercials and these characters on TV and these frail or ill older adults in real life, then that is what I'm going to imagine when I think about my own aging. And so exposure to the diversity of the aging experience is going to be crucial. And we know that older adults are particularly bad, not older adults, adults in general, we're really bad about predicting the future, but we feel very confident about our predictions of the future. So again, information and exposure is going to be really important.
You know, I think Dr. Menchola, that's a great point. One of the things that I would say is that, you know, we talk about the old lady with the cane. Well, what's to say just because she has a cane, she doesn't have a huge contribution to make. So I think part of it is that showing frailty in a physical standpoint that is oftentimes a natural part of aging doesn't discount their intellectual, social, emotional contribution to society. And so I kind of feel like we need to start being better at accepting aging of our bodies, but honor the aging of our spirits and our wisdom and our contribution, and not make that scary. So if somebody has a cane or is in a wheelchair or is not in perfectly good physical health, they're not irrelevant. And I think that is one of the concerns that I have about aging and this thing that's going on in, I don't know if it's just an American culture, but this hang up with how we look being directly tied to what we have to contribute. And I think that's a problem that exists whether you're a teenage girl or whether you're an 85-year-old woman with a cane. And so this creeps into look like ageism, but in my sense, I'd like to see us actually start to portray more older people in their true physical state, but also show the incredible emotional, psychological, intellectual contribution that they're still giving back to society.
There's an interesting commercial that does try to do that. It asks, some of you may have seen it, maybe you have. It's the one where the millennials are being asked, how does an old person do this? How does an old person do this? And of course, these millennials, according to this commercial, or the social experiment, will do all these things that become stereotypes. And then they bring old people in, and the old person just totally challenges that in many ways. And what they end up saying is that, wow, I had no idea. So a lot of our ideas can expand such that we start seeing people as humans and not necessarily defined by what they look like and what their contributions are, that we start looking at their humanity. So yeah, I'll make sure that comes on the one of the resources that we can look at when we send them back out to the attendants.
Thank you, Dr. Lester.
I taught undergraduate students, and I had them go out and with a questionnaire to interview an older adult. And it was interesting because many of them had not even talked to older people. And some of them they interviewed was their grandmother, who they never talked to. And they found out information that really showed that they were human. And some of them even talked about sex, and that really shocked the students. But I think that's a good activity for students to, encounter. But I didn't realize people didn't know their grandparents or didn't talk to their grandparents.
Thanks, Dr. Glover. I want to move on and ask Dr. Samuelson a question. Can you tell us a little bit more about what are some obstacles that people who are caring for their elderly loved ones may face, especially some obstacles if that person is resistant to getting help?
Yeah, that's actually a great segue, this whole topic of image and stigma and so forth, because of course, my world is communication and in audiology. And one of the biggest kind of stigma kind of signs about getting older is wearing hearing aids. And I work with grad students who are 20-somethings. And when they come through my rotation in the clinic, each of us audiologists, there kind of has a different niche. And my niche is doing the adults and geriatric patients. And lots of them come into my rotation telling me they're going to be pediatric audiologists. And I'll kind of smile and say, we'll see when you're done with my rotation. And I get them to do this very thing you guys were just talking about, which is I say, when you do your case history with this patient, sit and listen. And these people have amazing stories to tell. And you will just get to know this person as a human being that might have been in World War II and might have, all these just amazing stories that, like one of you said, they walk in like, oh, isn't she a sweet little old lady, and all of a sudden they find out, she's got a PhD and she's done this and that. And, all of a sudden at the end of my rotation, they're like, wow, these people, I think they look at going into like pediatric audiology as they're going to change this person's whole long life. And I say, wait a minute, these people still have a lot of living to do, and you're going to help them out and, you know, help them have a whole richer life and have their family have a richer life because of it.
Yeah, Kristin, in your world, we could meet Sandra Day O'Connor or RBG, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We meet some amazing people. So obviously in my world, the biggest obstacle that people come across is our communication obstacles, and they're huge. Statistics show that about 30%, about a third of people from age 65 to 75 have a hearing loss, and half of people over 75 have a disabling hearing loss that can get misdiagnosed as dementia, because, you know, grandpa's answering the wrong questions, but he's answering the wrong questions because he didn't hear what you said. And hearing loss is we call it the invisible handicap, because you might be able to see someone wearing glasses, or you see someone walking with a cane, or you see someone with like for vision, or you see somebody with a walker and you know they have a problem, but we don't always know someone has a hearing loss because it usually happens gradually. So kind of to get back to your original question, which is why are people resistant to that, is that the stigma. You know, a lot of times for people, they'll come in and they'll say, oh, I don't want hearing aids, it's going to make me look old. And first of all, I say, what's wrong with that? And second of all, it's not your hearing aids that make you look old. It's you going, huh? You know, and answering the wrong question. That's what's, you know, quote, making you look old. But, you know, the point is, why don't you, you know, if you can get the person to be willing to do what they need to do to help themselves, then they can get back into the family and back into life and back into conversations and back into the family and so forth. And there's a lot of depression that's associated with untreated hearing loss because of that, because of the isolation that comes from it.
Dr. Samuelson, could I offer a question that came from one of our attendees that's kind of related?
Yeah.
The question is, with the aging of America, are you seeing a big increase in elder-friendly technology, such as larger, more simple smartphones, et cetera, that may be related to the technology part that you just talked about?
Yeah, and that's also a kind of a nice link into the whole thing about younger people thinking that older people don't know about technology.
Right.
Almost every hearing aid that we fit nowadays are Bluetooth compatible. And so we can sync people's phones up to their hearing aids. And I remember one like 95-year-old lady that we got her all fit up with her new hearing aids, and the students are kind of going like, okay, now we're going to tell you about Bluetooth. And she looks at them and she goes, these are Bluetooth? Oh, cool, I can Skype my grandkids. And they just couldn't believe she even knew what Skype was, you know? And so, yeah, so the things, you know, these devices are getting smarter and smarter, but simpler and simpler so that people can use them.
Well, I'll add one more comment too. When people don't necessarily want the hearing aid and we sort of make them flesh tone so that they blend in with the flesh, I've noticed that flesh tone is not universal.
Exactly. My thoughts, I tell the students that everything, I take that flesh tone one, the flesh tone one, and I throw it and I go, don't ever talk to anyone about this. This is no one's flesh.
And trust me, if I were to get the flesh tone that you have, it would definitely stand out on my ear.
Yeah. No,
okay.
Hearing aids are now hair color.
Thank you.
And as a matter of fact, one of our manufacturers just came out with brand new black in the ear hearing aids so that they'll look like earbuds.
Great. Oh, okay. All right.
We're heading towards, so the stigma is starting to go away because the younger generations are used to seeing things in people's ears.
Thank you.
I want to get a little personal experience into this conversation and go to Maria, Jocelyn's mother. Hi there. I want to hear from you and have you tell us a little bit about your experience with caring for your parents as they aged, and then now kind of switching it and being cared for.
Thank you. My parents lived about 30 minutes from me here in Arizona, and they were doing very well. They were going to senior centers, and my dad would sing to the group. My dad would come over and fix things at my house. He was the one who could do all that stuff. My mom would be a good cook for meals, you know. And then as they got older, you could see that change. And my mom fell and hurt her knee, so she was not able to do very much. And then my dad fell and broke his hip twice. And so after that, they need a lot of care. They weren't able to go to the store themselves. They weren't able to go to the center by themselves. I would be the one they would call and ask me to drive them to these places or go shopping for them. And at my home, I had my husband who was having heart problems. So I was caring for him too.
And your kids.
And my family, my kids, yeah. But that was just natural. It just was there. So I would go over, and as they got into their 80s, they changed. They didn't want my help, helping them go to the bathroom, or saying, Dad, I'll do the driving this time. You know, he wanted to drive. He did not want to stop driving for a long time until they had a little accident, and then that was it. He stopped. So the obstacles are, some that I can think of, were they were resisting the help because they thought they could still do things, and they couldn't. And another obstacle was I wasn't there on a daily basis for a long time until this time, and I didn't know exactly what their habits were, you know, and how they wanted their meals, or how they got pretty picky, I say, you know, about how they wanted things done. They wanted the TV at a certain place, or the remote on the chair, you know, little things that would bother them if I changed it or didn't do it the way they liked doing it. And
move on to now.
so now I find those were some things that I found as problems with them. But I have to say, at the time, I never even thought of them as obstacles or problems. I just did, you know, what they needed. But now talking about all this, you know, I see that. And now for myself, being the older 77-year-old person, having somebody to care for me here, she's probably saying the same. I don't think I need all the help that I'm getting. I think I can still do a lot of things. But I noticed when I went to the doctor, my daughter went with me, the doctor talked to her instead of me, you know, and I find that an obstacle in my mind because, you know, I can understand what he's saying and I can write that down myself, you know, and that kind of made me think, oh, I'm really old, you know, and I haven't felt like I was old until recently. Let's see, what was the other thing I wanted to say? I always thought that I could do anything. When I was raising the family, I was the one that could build things or fix things, or, you know, give them ideas of fun things to do, you know, things like that. Now, I'm not as good as that. I still want to help, but I'm not coming up with the ability physically to do all those things. And mentally, I have a harder time thinking of things. And when I'm doing something, I have a harder time thinking of the order of what to do. I have to actually think about it instead of just automatically doing it. And to me, that's an obstacle. And I don't like it much, but I'm trying to admit that I need help, you know. Okay. That's all.
Thank you.
That was great. Thanks so much for sharing that
You're
personal story. Okay, to finish off this section.
Can I say something, Shana? to Jocelyn's mom, was it Maria? Is that your name? What was Maria? So what I think is a beautiful example, though, that has happened in your family, and I think is true of families, is you took care of your parents, and you were very loving about caring for your parents and doing things the way they needed or wanted, because that's what helped them. And what I think is true is the beautiful thing that you took care of your parents and you taught Jocelyn that that is how it's done. And now she has that relationship with you. And that is something that I've noticed in my work, in working with human development and aging, is that we teach that. That's a value. And I think that's a really beautiful value. So I would congratulate you for how you cared for your parents, and how now as a parent, Jocelyn is giving that same care to you. And I think you sound amazingly connected and aware of everything. And I think that your family values are beautiful. So
thank you very much.
Good work. Good work. Okay. I want to switch it up and go back to Dr. Samuelson and ask, how can we honor and utilize our elders' wisdom and life experiences in a meaningful way?
Well, I think, that very thing that I was telling the students about, listen and be patient, and also to bring in something that Jocelyn's mom just brought up, which is that I tell the students, you always face and address the patient. Always talk to your individual that's coming in for your services. And if their adult child happens to be sitting there and answers the question, let them answer the question, but keep looking at the patient. And because we do the same thing with, sign interpreters and language interpreters, you always address the person. And I think that's the first way to honor them, no matter what their, mental state is. And then draw the story, the person's life story out of them. And I tell my students too, the first thing you do when you bring your patient back is sit them down and say, what can I do for you today? Or what brought you in today? And then sit and listen and let them tell you their story. And that is, giving someone, I tell people in audiology all the time, I tell patients, I can do a lot about how you hear, but I can't do anything about how you listen. And listening it's like a lost art in our society. And if you'll actually look someone in the eye and let them tell you their story, it's so validating and so honoring and so meaningful, and then if you can get them to, like Dr. Glover was saying, like, go talk to your grandparents, ask them their story while you still can, because someday you'll be sorry that you didn't, when they're not there anymore to talk to, and your own parents and so forth. Ask your grandma and grandpa how they met each other. How was it when they were first dating, and that kind of story. And that's just, that's our best way of honoring and cherishing our older people, and realizing that they're such an amazing resource that you're not going to always have.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Menchola, what do you have to say about that?
I agree 100%. Asking, so we want to sort of tap into those things that even as we age remain strengths, right? And so one of the things that even in older age, even in people who are actually developing some kind of cognitive difficulties, older memories tend to remain a little bit more preserved, even if newer memories are fuzzier. And so absolutely asking older adults about their life histories, about their youth, about the important things in their life, it helps in so many ways. Reminiscing is so powerful that reminiscence therapy is actually used with individuals with dementia and depression. It shows some positive effects in terms of their mood and their overall functioning. There's something very powerful for older adults about putting their life histories together in a narrative. And so, you know, you can even work on some kind of project where like the family can make like a little book about, you know, grandma's life history with, you know, pictures, or you can do the family's history and where did the family come from, and pictures of, you know, the great grandparents and parents. It's good for the older adults as well, because one of the developmental tasks that we have as we age is to actually come up with our life history, some kind of narrative of our life, or of what our life was about, of how we got to this moment, that is meaningful and that we're at peace with, a life history that we're at peace with. So it's good for the family, it's good for the older adult. The other thing that we know remains strong, and actually stronger than ever in life, is wisdom. Older adults know so much about values and what's important in life. They're wise. And so ask your older relatives, ask your parents for advice. Something that's happening at work, a problem with your child, and listen to the perspective that they bring. And then the other thing that remains strong in older age is the things that we knew how to do. So maybe, you know, grandma was a great piano player, or your dad was a great painter. Ask them to teach you. Ask them to teach you how to do those things. Again, it's something the family can do together. They feel like they're part of the family. The most important thing, however you do it, is to make sure that your older family members remain engaged as part of the family in whatever way you can, and avoiding loneliness and just fostering that sense of that they're still contributing to family life. That's what's going to be most important.
I'll add to that. Ask your grandparents to, ask your parents and grandparents to tell you about their culture. Like my grandparents both emigrated from Sweden. And I would ask my grandfather to teach me Swedish when I was a little kid, you know, teach me about what it was like to grow up in Sweden and what it was like to come across on a boat with 25 cents in your pocket. And, you know, they have great stories that way to tell.
Well, I've got one I'll add too. My grandfather couldn't read or write. He had a third grade education. And I was teaching a class in children's literature, and we were talking about literacy, being able to read and write. And I had noticed that all along, and the family would give him Father's Day cards and birthday cards, and people would read them to him, and nobody ever actually talked about his not being able to read. So as part of my exercise alongside my students, as I sat down and I asked him about his not being able to read. And the moment was one that I will never sort of experience again, because he was almost apologetic that he couldn't learn how to read. But then I got the sense of the history of how when his parents died, he had to drop out of school in order to take care of his other siblings, and that he was taken on by some other woman in the community, a white woman who, for his room and board, he would do chores around the house. And so he felt like that was something that he and I, as a PhD grandson, would never ever talk about. But I felt like just knowing that experience has changed my whole attitude about reading and writing, and the ways in which we idolize that over storytelling. Because one thing he could do was tell me stories about him being a cook in the Army, and all this fried chicken and baked chicken and all these things that he did, which still satisfied the family. So there is a moment that can be both transformative for the person asking and potentially transformative for the person who's being asked. So thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Lester. Let's move on to section 3, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much. So the last thing we kind of want to talk about is the types of support that families really need in order to successfully care for older folks in their family units. So the first question we have, and I do want to be cognizant of time, but the first question we have is, what are the emotional, psychological, even effects of parenting, quote unquote, parent? And just before we talk about that, I wanted to talk a little bit about this term of parenting our parents. As a group, we talked about it significantly in detail, and we have definitely picked up on there's some contention about using this term of parenting our parents, and that it can be condescending, it can be demeaning, patronizing, even infantilizing. And I do think that there's something to that with the fact that we don't treat children or view children with the same respect as we do other adults. And so when we compare an adult to a child, inherently there's a disrespect there. So when we think about folks that care for young ones, for little ones, preschool teachers, daycare workers, they tend not to be as respected or well paid, and have the same kind of worth and value that other folks do. Even, you know, a kindergarten teacher sometimes doesn't get the same respect as a middle school teacher or a high school teacher or university professor, because we value that maturity over the mentality of a little one. So I think there is something to that, that when we're caring for kids, we think of it more like, okay, yeah, you know, you kept the kid alive, great. You fed them, you bathed them, you did all these things, and we don't maybe put the worth on that. And so I think there is a little connection when we think of caring for older folks, that same kind of thing comes into play, right? A lot of the workforce that cares for older folks aren't as respected, aren't well paid. I'm sorry?
Are often women.
Are often women of color, often immigrants. And so there is a lack of respect of doing that day-to-day care. And so I think that contributes to the contention or the demeaning feelings behind that term of parenting our own parents. And it is a term that we see out there. And that's because ultimately there is, I should have drawn it, but you know, if you think of a Venn diagram, the stuff that overlaps between caring for our older loved folks and parenting our children, there's a lot of overlap there. Obviously, there's a lot that's not, but it's easy to see why that comparison comes into play. But so taking that into account, we want to think about, you know, for the caregiver, for the child or the niece or whomever, grandchild who's caring for their elder loved one, what are some of kind of the mental emotional effects on that caregiver? And we're going to go ahead and start with Melissa.
So I think the first thing that I would say is that sometimes when you are caring for a family member, you don't even identify as a caregiver. So you think, you know, this is my mom, sister, dad, brother. I'm not their caregiver. I'm their mom, sister, dad, brother. And so automatically when you kind of don't identify as a caregiver, you sometimes will also identify with the fact that you yourself need to make sure that you're practicing good self-care. And those mental, you know, we've talked about, Dr. Glover talked about some of these earlier. We see caregivers whose own health deteriorates. We see greater prevalence of depression and anxiety in people who are caring for a loved one. And those are really real things. And we have to have conversations and collaboratively work with family caregivers so that they are open to having those conversations and they feel okay about saying, it's okay for me to want to have a break from being the 24-hour caregiver of my mom. My mom will still know that I love her if I get 4 hours of respite care a week so that I can take a nap or go to the movies. One thing we also see in family caregivers, a lot of their personal relationships are impacted because they're spending the majority of their time caring for that loved one. And they, a lot of times, especially, you know, this is generalizing a little bit, especially women, they tend to put all their energy into that caregiving role to the demise of other things in their life. And when we have that kind of unhealthy balance in any area of our life, it's going to take its toll emotionally, mentally, physically. So I think the first thing is just helping people recognize what that caregiver role is and helping them to kind of come to an acceptance of being a caregiver means I also need to care for myself as the caregiver. And that might look very different to each person. Some people may just need time every week to get out and continue doing the things they love to do. Some people may want to go to a support group. Whatever those activities are, it should be a collaborative discussion with anybody that's involved, including the person that they're caring for, about what is needed. That's what makes healthy relationships, when we can openly communicate about what is needed. That's how we get what we need. But a lot of times we start by having family caregivers recognize that this is a choice that they're making. Even if it is their loved one, this is a choice that they're making. It isn't something, a lot of people are surprised, legally, it isn't something that they have to do. You are not legally required to care for your parent in the same way that you are required to care for a child. And that changes the dynamics of how you may feel about it or what might be expected of that person. So I think we just have to recognize that if we have a family caregiving situation, we also need to recognize that the care of the caregiver is just as important as the care of the care recipient.
Thank you for that, Professor Elliott. Appreciate that. Okay, we're going to skip ahead just a little bit. So Dr. Glover, can you speak a little bit about how the dynamic changes between parent and child as the parent becomes more dependent?
Okay, so if you think about older adults, many of them are independent. They want to pay for services. They do not want to be a burden on their family. In practice, I've talked to many older adults, and that is interesting because they would tell the nurse, but they won't tell their family members how they feeling. But what I see when I worked with older adults and the children just kind of take over their lives almost. And it's usually in response to something that was unsafe. For example, one of my neighbors fell in the middle of the yard and didn't have a cell phone. The wife was in the backyard. He was in the front yard. So the family just really went, wild and wanted just them to move out their house and do those kind of things. But older adults have told me that they feel powerless because they depend so much on their family to make decisions about their health care and living arrangements, etc. But it is important for children to include them in these decision-making, in the decision-making process, so their parents know that they still have a voice. This also provides their parents with a sense of dignity and allows them to remain autonomous. And so basically, and I can share experience with my mother because I live out of town. She lives in Ohio. And so I just said, well, I want you to come and visit. And she responds to me and said, well, when do I have to come? Like I was telling her she had to come, which that made me think that she thought I was trying to, take over her life. And I told her, it's your choice. I mean, when you want to come, when you have the time, and if you want to come. And so those kind of things that I think we miss when we're in the caregiving role. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That's an interesting perspective that, folks maybe they don't want to admit to their families that they need help because they are afraid that might result in some loss of autonomy. Absolutely. Just for sake of time, we're going to go ahead and skip to that last question. And for all the folks out there watching, we will have a list of agencies and resources available that we will get mailed out, emailed out as soon as possible. So please be on the lookout for that. But Dr. Menchola, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what are some strategies that family caregivers can implement to reduce that or prevent that caregiver burnout that we talked about.
Yes, so luckily we do know from research with caregivers and programs for caregivers what tends to make the biggest difference in terms of caregiver burnout. And one of the most important things for caregivers to receive from those of us that are providers and work on services, is there's this concept of self-efficacy. And what self-efficacy means is this feeling that I can do this. Okay, I got this. I know what to do. I know where to find, I know what I need to do. I can do it. I got it. A lot of caregivers don't feel that way, right? And so one of the most important, most meaningful things that we can give caregivers that caregivers need is just knowledge and resources. So, you know, your parent just got diagnosed with diabetes, knowing what that means, what can they eat, what can't they eat, where can I buy the food, how does insulin work, what complications should I expect, what symptoms do I be, just that knowledge and getting all of that provided from reliable sources and education on what things are and how to do things. One of the reasons support groups are so important for caregivers is not just because of the emotional and social component, but it's specifically because you learn from other caregivers. You know, what do I do when the insurance, you know, rejects that medication for the third time? I'll call this person, there's this agency, go to this resource. How do I get this approved? They know how to call, they know somebody in this agency that was super helpful. So that kind of knowledge and sharing skills is extremely important, and we know makes a difference in caregiver stress and burnout. The other very important thing is something that Melissa already mentioned, which is this reframing of your beliefs about the caregiving role. What are you telling yourself about your position as a caregiver? Do you approach it as like, I'm stuck, you know, and if I don't, like, I have to do this, and just reframing that as I'm choosing to do this because I think is the right thing to do. It's a privilege to take care of my parent, and I'm choosing to do this because I want my parent to be well taken care of. Just that shift from like I have to I choose to is very, very important. And there's one more thing that is very important for caregivers' mental health and mood, that it's true we don't talk about a lot, but it's the fact that a lot of caregivers are in the position to take care for parents that they were not close to and that they perhaps had actually a bad relationship with. There are parents that were not warm, loving parents. There are caregivers out there caring for parents that were frankly abusive. And that generates a lot of emotional distress and mixed feelings, and then feelings of guilt, and then the resentment, and then guilt over the resentment. And so it's extremely important for caregivers to have a space, whether it's a trusted friend, whether it's a counselor, a therapist, or a support group, to say these things out loud, to talk about the guilt, to talk about the shame, to talk about the anger, to process these things so that they can really engage in the caregiving role from a healthy place.
Okay, well, we are moving toward the end of our program, but we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that our co-founder who underwrites this program, the Come Rain or Shine Foundation, Michelle Mace, is here. And we'd love to give her an opportunity to tell us a little bit about the foundation and her vision of the parenting and the extent to which Project Humanities is aligning with their vision. So we'll give her a few minutes and then we'll do the final wrap up. And we appreciate those who are hanging around. So Michelle.
Great, thank you. Thank you, first of all, to all of our panelists and I loved hearing your expertise from your various backgrounds in aging. Dr. Samuelson, I actually did my undergraduate work in speech science at ASU. So I love and appreciate your work tremendously and the role that you play in assisting our aging and hearing populations. Melissa, thank you so much for your beautiful work inside the Area Agency on Aging and just the vast knowledge. It's incredible to hear you talk and know the just array of subjects that you have clearly covered over the course of your life's work and, you know, at the agency and the sensitivity to it. Same thing, Dr. Glover and Dr. Menchola. So the fullness of this conversation is really incredible. My interest is, has been really in the side of parenting, and the conversation today about our aging parents, and they're still parents. And I think, that we talk about what's the difference between parenting a child and caring for your aging parent. And I think there's a huge difference. And I think it hits on two things. One thing that Dr. Menchola said, which is choice. When you have a child and bring a child into the world, I guess you have a choice to parent them, but truly you have a responsibility. When it comes to our aging parents and a decision to care for them, that's a choice. And some people view it as a responsibility. And maybe, as Dr. Menchola said, we don't always view it the most healthy way because of the way, the relationship went over the years that they were our parents. So I think it's a fascinating conundrum. But I think that one of the things that I take away from today is the difference between caregiving for an aging parent and caregiving for a child. One is, to me, responsibility, one is choice. The other that I think is absolutely critical that came clear to me today in this conversation is that when you're parenting your children, it's your responsibility to instill values. And I think Jocelyn's mom and Jocelyn, the handing down of values to care for your family members is an example. And it's really kind of one that triggered it for me, is that that's really a critical difference between caring for children and caring for your parent. To your child, you're responsible for instilling values, which is why Come Rain or Shine Foundation chose to give Project Humanities a grant to do these kinds of conversations, because we believe in the Humanity 101 values. And I believe that those are good parenting values. They're also good values to use in caring for your older parent. Having said that, you can't give your parent values. Those are theirs. They're already baked in at whatever age they're at. And you might have an opportunity, if you have a respectful relationship with them, to help shape or refine what they think, but their values were already baked in a long time ago by their parents. So I think for me, the big takeaway in today is that the reason it's really caring for your aging parents and not parenting your aging parents is because parenting is about instilling values. And we can instill values like the Humanity 101 values in our children in a more active way. There's a lot more permission required to encourage those values inside our parents who've lived a different life and may or may not adopt those things. Those become their adult choices to make. So I think really that's all I kind of have to say, but I thank all of you and appreciate the contribution you make to aging. And thank you, Dr. Lester, for this conversation, and to your team for hosting everybody.
And also, I want to thank everybody for not losing our composure during the moment of distraction. So team, thank you very much for pressing on. That's, I think, is an interesting way of also talking about our humanity and the fact that we are always running into things that we don't control. And our character is often measured not by what happens to us, but how we react to that. So thank you very much. It took away from one angle, but it did not take away from my perspective, the quality of our conversation. So I thank all of you for participating, for those who are still there, for those who are in Facebook. Rachel, can you come in and do the final sort of wrap up details here? Rachel? There you go, thank you.
Yeah, I sure can. All right. So thank you everybody for joining in today. There is one final ask that we have for those as you leave, kind of as final next, or not final steps, but rather next steps. So the first thing is that we will be sending feedback forms over to you. So what should happen is when you open the when you close this chat, or when we end this chat, the link of the feedback form will populate. If it does not get sent out to you and you do not see it, we will email it to you in your inbox within the next couple of days to make sure that you are able to fill it out. We like feedback from both panelists and attendees all alike. So look for that because it's very short. It takes about 2 minutes to do, and we really do appreciate feedback. Other next steps is we have the Humanity 101 pledge that, again, we would love attendees and panelists to sign alike. Dr. Lester talked about it earlier, where if you can subscribe to being compassionate, kind, empathetic, forgiving, having integrity, and following our 7 principles, we encourage you to sign the pledge. And finally, if you want to continue the conversation with our events, we do have 2 that are coming up. So we have Call Out Culture, and I believe the date is this date? Yeah, it's April 21st. And then Eating Up Easter is actually going to be in June. So keep a lookout on our social media and our calendar to see other ways to join in. We would really love to have you. And once again, thank you for joining in. Dr. Lester, do you want to give the final closeout?
Nope, that's it. We just want you, if you enjoyed your program tonight, please go tell somebody. If you didn't, just keep it to yourselves. We're trying to do some good work, and we appreciate all of our strategic partnerships and supporters. So thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.